Recording here. Welcome, Kyle and Rachel and Samantha. And on behalf of Rhythm, we're glad that we can carve out space to be together and connect and just talk about ways in which things can emerge even in really interesting and difficult times. And I'm glad you made some time for us. So take it over, Jeff.
Sure. Well, I mean, since we're starting with such a small group, we want to take time this week to get into some more of the regenerative principles and our responses, but would love just to hear where people are at since we're a small group and have some time. And so if anything's not top of mind or anything you're just wanting to share and be heard this week, it'd be great to hear from you. And when we just go around.
And pass the baton to the next person when you're done.
Yeah, I'll go first. I think at least there's more and more conversations that I'm having with individuals and organizations that are in a variety of different places working through this crisis. And I'm finding that I need to be quite present. Not that I don't really recognize that normally, but if I just got off a conversation with somebody who is already through the quote unquote grieving process and is ready to get to work, it's a very different headspace and presence than it is when someone who is still feeling the pressure and the angst and the burden of everything that is happening. And so I am now really slowing down, both in terms of my activity and my conversations, to just really increase my perception of, so where are you in this process, so that I can serve you where you are versus push or pull. And so anyhow, that's just a reflection of me and how I'm processing through this with others. So I can pass it to Rachel.
Dokes. Yeah, life here is very different to, I think, life in any of the other city settings. It has pretty much gone on mostly. We've gone off the farm maybe once to go deliver chickens or get some supplies. So I do feel like we're living in a little bit of a bubble here. But I have enjoyed this opportunity to just really connect with the family. Especially during the school with my younger sister. We've been able to get into a really nice rhythm, and I've also just been able to have that time and space to also, like Tracy, just slow down and be like, well, where are you in this process? If it's COVID-19 or if it's just her development in general. I've just enjoyed that kind of forced time where I'm not rushing all over the place doing, actually don't know what, when you kind of slow it down. And then obviously just having my dad back as well, it's given us time to sort of decide where we want to go, what we're building as a family in a company setting, and just given us a lot more time around conversations. Yeah, so from my space, that's kind of been me for the last week. I'm going to pass it on to Kyle.
Hey, thanks, Rich. Yeah, so I think from a zoom out perspective now, it's not often that I've had the opportunity over the last few weeks the main business that I run is a digital agency. And I don't know if you've noticed, but probably the first thing that people do when they work from home for the first time in their careers, or at least for a very long time, is they look at their website and they realize all the things that they should have changed a couple of years ago. So we've been getting loads of requests from people. Our business is just ridiculously expanded. It's in an unsustainable way, over the last 2 to 3 weeks here. And, while working from home, adjusting the business itself, everybody kind of, having to be in sync. So it's been pretty rough, and from a different perspective. So not from, maybe there's some sort of underlying fear, but the average person that I'm checking in is mostly just freaking out because, they've realized that there's some sort of a mistake and they're worried about their business. And so we're the ones who tend to take on a lot of that. So it's been pretty crazy, but we're trying to adjust at the same time. Who should I pass to? Let's see. I will pass to Samantha.
I don't really know what to say. I don't remember what day it is anymore. Like, I think that's the same for a lot of people. I don't particularly want to stick to routines because I find that I have to listen. I'm trying to listen a lot to sort of, my body, and every day is a different day for my body. So I'm sort of tuned in to my natural rhythm and no longer kind of looking at the calendar so much in that sense. And I had this kind of weird thought that maybe I'm spending too much time with myself and I'm losing track of where the world kind of is. I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but I think we need those moments every now and again. Problem is I'm an introvert and I tend to, that tends to be my life. So if that gets too extreme, then I can sort of end up shutting people out for a long period of time, which I'm very happy about, but I understand that's not necessarily good for my long-term well-being, especially social well-being. It's also very amazing to hear, you guys, talking about being on a farm. I'm in a studio apartment in a densely populated city, and I need a quarantine pass to go outside, and I can only go outside for 2 reasons: to go to the grocery shop to buy food, or to go to the clinic to get a checkup. So I'm not literally allowed to go outside just to take a walk. That's been playing on my mind a lot, but I'm just, sort of try not to let it get to me. Thank goodness I have big windows at least, and the skies are clearing up because there's no more pollution in Manila. So yeah, really pensive, really paying attention to kind of my inner rhythm, and yeah. So I'd like to ask Jeff next.
Great, thank you. Thank you everyone for your sharing. Yeah, this week, things have gotten very personal for me, and actually there's a blog is coming out today that I wrote around working with grief, and I think that's true for all of us. Trey mentioned it. I think we are all somewhere in the grief process, and so I've been thinking a lot about how to consciously work with grief as an individual, as an organization, to see it as part of this regenerative process. And that has helped me a lot to focus on consciously working with all the different emotions and different experiences, and putting it into a form that I hope is an offer of some kind is also really beneficial for me, to just think of how can I make whatever I'm going through personally useful for others in whatever form, and in an offering form versus versus too heavy-handed in some way. So we'll keep hosting these. We'll talk about that more another time, but that's where I'm at this week. Jen?
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster week for me, and Samantha, my heart goes out to you about, I think the only thing that's, one of the things that I can find respite in is going outside. And, so I'm so sorry that is not really an option for you. And so I think we mentioned last week that our son, who just is finishing up his last year at university, he's with us now, and he is traveling back to Colorado tomorrow or day after tomorrow. And our oldest son lives there, and if he wanted to come back to us, we heard that it may be difficult for people coming from Colorado because it's a hot spot. So he may not be able to get back to us. And, it's just, like the fear, I guess, or the anxiety of the separation. So that's been hard too. And yeah, my mother is not dealing with all of this very well, and she calls me every day and lets me know about it. But they're healthy. I mean, that's good. So I think she just watches the news too much. But yeah, our team did a planned disturbance week because I think that in Rhythm didn't have enough disturbance going on. So, but no, it was a good exercise. But yeah, it's just been kind of a crazy week for me personally. But that's all for now.
Great, thank you, everyone, and thank you for sharing this space with us. We thought we would go in a little bit to the blog that Trey wrote on really thinking about regenerative responses, specifically with the 6 principles in mind. And so I'm going to share my screen and just really wanted to, again, open-ended, have a conversation with everyone. That work? Everybody see my screen? Okay. Sometimes a little green. It's funny, sometimes it gives you a nice little green border to tell you that you are sharing, and sometimes it doesn't. So yeah, I thought we'd just start at the top here and tell a little bit about how we think about these principles, and then really maybe from the point of view of inspiration, thinking about how we are thinking about, or any questions we have, how can we support each other in thinking about how to apply these principles. So so the first principle we see in regenerative organizations is this idea of holism, which is, of course, we know, and this is being brought to light in very real ways, the interdependency of all of our systems in our lives and society, but particularly within an organization, then we tend to think of different departments, we tend to think of different functions separately. So this is the recognition that everything is interconnected and interdependent on one another. And recognizing that all the decisions we make have ripple effects, have threads that connect to everyone in the organization, as well as our customers and our partners and everyone that we are touching and in our families and our lives. And so we think of, a traditional response to a crisis like this often just circling the wagons, bringing things in, thinking about what is most immediate, what's most important. The unemployment claims in the U.S. anyways hit 10 million today. Which is orders of magnitude unprecedented, So obviously a lot of organizations just making decisions, thinking about what they need to do. And so what do we feel a regenerative response is then to this crisis with holism in mind? And just open it up to any questions or stories or ideas or inspirations people might have.
Well, I think for me, the biggest thing is it's really about people seeing the impact of human activity or the lack of human activity in their own, sometimes it's in their own backyards, right? And for example, yesterday seeing this video of goats overrunning, I don't know if you guys saw this, overrunning a town in Wales. It was amazing. They were just exploring, and you can see the curiosity, so just as we trapped in our areas, watching nature come back in, nature's curious about what we have created because we've drawn that line of separation. So for me, that suddenly now is really, in plain view. I feel like people can really understand the connectedness now. People can really see what it means to be interdependent. And I think I had another conversation with a friend talking about how difficult it actually is. We don't have the right words to communicate complexity. You just have to see it and you just have to feel it. And this is on a global scale that's happening right now. So I feel like in terms of at least, opening that possibility, right, for people to understand that, it's then a choice for them to actually step through the door on their own. But I feel like that's also, in a sense, a subconscious choice, just by looking at the reaction, on social media, that people are just breezing right through that door. And that to me is a holistic response.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
Yeah, what's come to mind for me is I think when you're in the middle of some of this crisis, to use your metaphor, Jeff, it's kind of circling the wagons. What can you do to fortify so that your loss is less than as minimal as it can be? And I've been a part of a lot of conversations to where the life-giving relationships of customers and vendors or suppliers or partners are not being considered in some of this redesign. And so it's as though, listen, and of course, team members and staff are extremely important in that design process, but the health of an organization or any system is more than just that one whole. And so when you're making decisions, what does it look like to consider beyond that? And just had several conversations recently where that was not even a consideration. So people's contracts or relationships that they've had and relied upon were just canceled. And And I understand there's a lot of those kind of tough decisions, but in some regards, they haven't been tough because they have just been easy to externalize that and just protect this. And so for me, I'm just wrestling through and recognizing that holism requires me to be attentive to all of the different holes that are related to the one that I'm in, and to not make decisions at its expense.
Thank you, Trey.
Hi, how are you all? Sorry, I arrived a bit late.
Rachel, your voice has changed. What's happened?
I tried to hide away. You found me.
I snuck in.
Nice to hear from you, Rolf.
I had to process chickens today because we couldn't. Staff weren't allowed to come onto the farm, so I have been working. Just my reflections on holistic. I think at this point, with what we're dealing with, agriculture is, in most cases where there's a lockdown, is considered an essential service. So the ranchers or farmers around are allowed to travel a lot more freely than most. And I think our big challenge now is to, sort of try and get people to all stand together in the farmers communities and say, just because we can doesn't mean we should. We've got to take into account all those people that are sitting in Joburg in little flats and can't really do what we're doing. So I think when I look at holistic and the regenerative mindset, it's really making sure that we take into consideration all those that potentially might have a problem with what we're even doing.
Thank you, Rolf. Yeah, I'll share a bit. I think building from what you were saying, Samantha, I think it's really hard for us, particularly with our education and our day-to-day experiences in a conventional mechanistic system, to actually really comprehend holism or experience holism. I think we get dependence. We know what it means to be dependent on someone. But to really get interdependence, actually, I keep meaning to change that, Trey, in our definition. Because to me, there's a big difference. And where interdependence is really recognizing that the me and the you and the connection between me and you truly is one whole. It's one process. It's not just if you pull a thread here, it affects many others. It's actually that everything is one totality. It's one process, and really making decisions from that perspective. It's not altruism to do something or not do something based on someone else. It's actually self-interest, because there's a total connection between the you and the me. And I don't really know. I mean, I think it's rare. I think we see examples of behaviors like that in deeply human, deeply relational contexts, right? And I think one of the big things we're fighting against is, we're hearing it less and less, but I think we're really fighting against this idea that, right, a business is something different. You make decisions based on your family, and that's different than the decisions you make on your business, right? Like, this was you don't hear it so much anymore, but like, oh, I made a business decision is, right, somehow a euphemism for I made a terrible decision that affected people, but it's okay because there were business reasons to do it, profit, money. So I think, yeah, that's my thoughts. I think it's something
I was just thinking about put on your work hat.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think part of our challenge for those of us, and something we think about in Rhythm a lot is, given that holism and interdependence is not a easily accessible experience for most of us, how do we provide tools in the meantime to make decisions from that place? That's in the agriculture spaces we work in, that's, to me, that's the real genius and brilliance of Alan Savory's work, and the Savory method is this grazing plan is a tool to make holistic decisions, accepting that we don't tend to just intuitively see the whole. And Kyle, Rachel, any thoughts on this principle? Or you're not required necessarily, but just want to give space for it before we move on? Or Jen?
Yeah,
sorry.
For sure. Look, I think from my perspective, at least, I don't know if it's if I have very much of value to contribute, but from what Rolf has said, I'm one of those people sitting in an apartment in Joburg, and if I'm honest, I haven't had much of an opportunity to think about anything outside of my my own problems over the last couple of weeks. The problems that I have taken on have been work related, and I think just kind of bouncing off of what you said, Jeff, I think probably one of the hardest things I've had to deal with over the last 2-3 weeks, almost 2 weeks of lockdown and being indoors, is separating work from sort of home life. Is the boundaries have just been kind of shattered for me, and it's nothing new. I think from the way that I've handled work and decisions from a business point of view have always been kind of interwoven with personal decisions and my own. I run my business in a way that I think reflects my own values. I just think that recently I haven't really had the opportunity to kind of consider anything else. So it's it's like you said, about circling the wagons. I think it's like crisis mode now, and I'm trying to sort of look up and take a breath. So nothing much of value to contribute from holistic thinking, but I definitely need to be applying more of it.
Thank you for your reflections.
My situation's very similar to what Dad said. It's kind of having that ability of freedom and don't abuse it. So the fact that I do have the privilege to walk out my door and go for a walk doesn't mean that I need to be popping into a friend next door. It doesn't take away from the fact that we still need social, obviously, engagement and stuff, but there are other ways to go about that in this time. So it's WhatsApp call or face calling, and connecting with people in different ways. So being attentive to your need of I need connection with people, but in this time it doesn't need to be face to face. And then just to consider the whole in. Just because I could find a reason to go see someone face to face doesn't mean I should be. So that's my holistic perspective.
Great, thank you all. And it is a great reminder that our countries are in different levels of this quarantine. And so again, to reflect what Jen mentioned, best to you all who are in stricter conditions at the moment than some of us are. So Jen, any thoughts on holism before we move on?
I'm saving it for evolutionary.
Okay.
I don't want us to run out of time. I'm good, thank you.
Well, we don't have to go in order. You want to jump to evolutionary?
Yeah. Are you going to read it first?
Sure. I mean, the principle, of course, is quite clear to us all now. The world is changing, often unpredictably, and as a principle for an organization, it's recognizing how do we build structures, how do we build processes that are equipped for change, right? We tend to build things in a conventional way based upon the myth of predictability, that we can, or the relative predictability of the future. And so we think evolutionary principle is actually how do we create conditions for the best types of responses, the best types of resilience, how do we stay how do we stay in this dynamic balance between ourselves, our organizations, and the environment. And it does come from a place, it's very connected to holism, in that if we really understand holism, we see there actually is no true hard difference between what we say is our business versus the environment of our business, or our family and the environment of our family. It is one process. But we recognize we have a certain level of will and decision making around something close to us, and maintaining that balance with the larger systems is how we think about responding in an evolutionary way.
I was thinking about my role in rhythm, and how I feel like it's evolving. And I think that, as always, it's good to be adaptable and evolve. And that's a principle that we, of course, think about, but how it's shifted, I think, for me. And, just, if you guys know me, Rachel and Rolf do, but typically I'm just like, oh, this is great, everything's great in rhythm, we want to help you, we're excited about what the offerings we're providing, and kind of a joke, like kind of jazz hands Jen, like, oh, let's do this together and it's going to be amazing. And I've just had to take a step back, like, whoa, this is really crazy what's happening. And so the shift, what I'm trying to say is that my role is, I'm also a very empathetic person, and I want to help and I want to reach out. So that shift in evolution of my role has been, now it's, let's just be together, let's connect, let's, do you need help with something in your business? Or, like Kyle, like, do you, if you're stressed out, or, and how, your tendency to overwork in maybe times like this, and, are there tips that we can talk about? Or anyway, so it's really interesting how my role has shifted, and evolved a little bit, so, which is a good thing, I guess.
Thanks, Jen.
I just wanted to add on a kind of individual level, as well as I feel like a global level, that generally speaking, in times of crisis, a lot of evolution happens, and you start to see very clearly what is the old and what is the new. So I think the important thing for me is, how do we enable the new? So in line with sort of leaning into the evolution, how do we cast aside the old as quickly as possible and enable the new with as much empowerment as possible, from taking ideally the resources of the old? Because only through, I think, that process do we move through the grief and go into a mode of productivity that actually regenerates life.
Thank you.
Sorry, Jeff, I think I was muting you and unmuting you, but yeah, can you respond to Samantha about that?
Yeah, that's right. You mean about the blog? Yeah, you'll see. It's probably in your inbox, Samantha. If not, I'll send it. But our next blog is exactly, it's right in line with what you said, that we are seeing grief as actually the process of reorganization, in the same way that fungi and the bacteria inside a grazing herbivore's gut is breaking down nutrients and allowing them to be reorganized and give fertility to soil and give fertility for new life. I think my view my thought is that actually emotionally grief is actually the process of decay. It's the necessary process to allow us to reorganize information, to allow us to reorganize our thoughts and processes, to be able to bring creativity, to give new life to new forms and new expressions.
And that isn't without pain.
Correct. Yep. Pain, anger, denial, the traditional stages are, but that's part of it. It's Sorry, Rolf, you wanted to jump in, please.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, I think my sort of view on it is just, again, in the current situation, realizing how that in order to put structures in place, we've got to go back to holism and realize that there's different types of people, and it's been quite interesting for me just to see how different people have responded to the crisis that we're in. And when we're looking at putting structures in place, I'm having to do that as part of organized agriculture at the moment. And what I think works often really doesn't work, because it really depends on people. And I think when I look at evolutionary, and I think, Jeff, your point is valid, is I just want to put stuff in place that'll fix things and make things better. But often the structure we need to have in place is actually just to allow that panic to settle, or the hurt to settle, or that, as you say, that decay and new life to sort of start coming up. So instead of trying to find a structure that will always fix the problem, perhaps what we need to look at when we're looking at an evolutionary structure is actually a structure that will allow people to just move through those different forms of emotions that they're feeling. So that's my take on it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think what Dad said, they're watching people, how they respond to different, or how people are responding differently to the situation. And it's like frustrating also in the sense of some people aren't willing to adapt to, it's like the ride it out effect. We're just going to sit here and it's going to be better. Like, we're just going to give it the lockdown time. And when those 3 weeks are done, like, things will go back to normal. From one side, which is frustrating to try to deal with as well, because it's like the world is changing. It's never going to go back to what was normal before. And then what Jen said about the role as well, evolving. Alex sent through some work recently as well, questions to run through. So I definitely feel that I can relate there. I feel like my role where I am is also shifting and evolving because of the thanks to coronavirus.
Thanks, Rachel. Other thoughts on evolutionary? Rolf, you mentioned in your response, I think something that's really connects to the principle of uniqueness, right? That we this is recognizing there is not a one-size-fits-all solution to a complex crisis, right? That each of us, in this case, emotionally, are in different places, are needing different structures, but as an organization, this is the recognition that when we're really working with complexity, there is no such thing as best practices, right? There is no set of recipes that you can follow that will come out to predictable outcomes, because the starting place is always different in a complex system. So yeah, I'm curious how you are all recognizing complexity and uniqueness in that way, or working with uniqueness in response to this crisis.
You know, that's something I've been talking to people about when, you know, we have discussed what it looks like if we have to reorganize and rebuild based on, you know, this pandemic. Is let's, you know, I've been saying it more of a way of like, let's hope that it's more people-centered, and let's hope that, you know, people understand the impact that we've had on the environment, and, you know, let's hope that this doesn't just go back to business as usual when, you know, when all is said and done, and we take this as an opportunity, you know, rather than just seeing it as a crisis alone, but see it as a challenge that we can get through, you know, together as humanity. You know, we've been talking about let's hope that that's the case. And I was in a conversation with one of our creative directors, and because we're working on a local site and campaign for quite a big fund for the crisis in South Africa, and you know, both of us kind of reached the decision in the process that we wouldn't really talk about, you know, let's hope that this will happen. We'd rather talk about actual ideas that we can put into place, and new structures that we can, you know, add some sort of a value through. I think, Jeff, you were talking about building actual content, you know, around solutions. And I think that one of the sort of a different type of evolution in our own thinking as a business is, you know, instead of talking about how everyone else will do things and what it'll be, is, you know, we're trying to change something. I'm trying to change something with a team of people to say, well, what could we potentially do to actually influence that and make a difference, instead of just hoping that it'll change. So for what it's worth, that's what it brings to mind.
Thank you, Kyle.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Jeff said before about structure. I guess this is something, because of the way we're educated, or cultures or something, that we kind of rely back on structure to somehow provide that security, when, to me, I feel very, very insecure when I feel that a leader feels that they need to impose structure in order to have control. So that for me goes back to trust in the system, and to trust in the people and the individuals in the system to do their jobs the best way that they know or can or were built for. That's why hopefully they're there in those positions. So just as, you know, the doesn't know its place in the ecosystem, I think a person doesn't need to know his or her place in the organization either. They just need to be able to do their job. And I don't think we need a structure for that, in terms of finding your uniqueness or finding your place. Like, nobody should be able to tell you how to do your job well. you're there because you do it well. But that's hard for people to grasp because it's based on trust. So I definitely struggle with communicating that. I think I lack the words.
Thank you, Samantha. Reflections on that or other thoughts? I think to connect that, Samantha, that really connects well your comments on this other principle of Noodle, right? This is a network term meaning that top-down traditional command and control decision making is not serving people, because it's recognizing that, exactly as you said, the people in their roles, in their uniqueness, in their context, understanding their local context best, whether it's in an organization or in a network or in society, are empowered to be able to, and empowered, therefore trusted, to be able to make the best decisions they can because they have the immediate information. And so others have thoughts on this idea of trust and decision-making and nodal structures versus centralized structures?
I told Trey last night that the way that the US government is making decisions and how to respond to this, I think could be a case study on, it's control, trust us, we've got this, until the bottom falls out and we don't, and scrambling around to try to, I think we're going to be reading about how this is all being handled and the decision making behind how to work with this crisis is pretty interesting.
Thanks, Jen. Others thoughts on anything really, on any of the principles? We see how interconnected these principles are, of course. They're nothing sacred about the rows here of this, but just a way to understand the whole by thinking of these principles more as windows into a regenerative organization, or windows into a regenerative system.
So with the nodal principle, I think for me, it's kind of like been a mind thing of, yes, nodal, we need nodal. But when it comes to actions, like, I'm waiting for hierarchy. I'm like, just tell me what to do next. So it's kind of that fight inside that I want nodal, but then there's, waiting for instructions instead of just living it out. Taking that shift from action and in your mind. I think that's kind of what I'm dealing with at the moment, getting it into real life, not just on paper.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think one thing that's sometimes assumed or misunderstood is that nodal means that every node is now somehow involved with the decision. We contrast top down to something else, which we tend to think about as sort of consensus-based decision making. And if we really look at nodal structures in nature, it's recognizing there are this diversity of decision-making loops. Some are very, very fast and very local. Some are very slow, and involve many feedback from lots of different parts of the system. And so conversation we get into a lot to build on what you're saying, Rachel, is like, we often say, well, this is great, but come on, when something really has to be decided, right, we're going to go back to the traditional way, right? It's got to be, someone's got to make the call. The buck's got to stop with someone. And so we try to encourage that actually there's many bucks stopping with many people for the information they have. And that's really what trust is, right? If we really think about systems, we have a lot of trust in people, we have a lot of trust in. We actually trust that they are making the best decision based upon, and they are the best person to be making it. This is a soapbox of mine, that I actually think transparency, or the call for transparency, is actually the opposite of trust. Because if you want to see everything, that means you don't trust that someone's making a really good decision, and you can just trust the outcomes of that decision.
Well, that I find really interesting, because I was about to say that I just came out of 2 years of working in a so-called Noodle or flat hierarchy system that had zero transparency, so not even a little bit. And that made me very distrustful of not only the people, but the system itself, because I did not feel that the decisions were being made in, one, good faith, and two, any sort of experienced perception. So like, there's definitely a level of transparency that I think needs to be achieved, but definitely I agree that the total transparency, or the demand for total transparency, can also be a backlash.
Yeah, for sure. And we think of that as one of the inherent processes we see in a regenerative organization is relevant communication, right? So it's receiving the information one needs at the time to be able to integrate, evaluate, and make an appropriate contextual decision with that information, right? Versus a traditional government idea of transparency, right, is whatever, 120,000 emails on Hillary Clinton's server. Like, it's transparent, but what do you do with all that information? Or but yeah, it's a great point, Samantha. Well, we are coming up on the hour. Just want to open it up for any further thoughts that we touched on. Really just to round out the table, we've really, the last row there, it really connects to many of the others, right? And we've touched on them without discussing it directly, but it's the recognition that individuals, all parts of a system, all parts of an organization, their personal development needs to be supported, or individual development needs to be supported. And how do we make decisions based on all these principles that allow for collective development as well as individual development, collective thriving as well as individual thriving? So, any final reflections or thoughts before we sign off for now?
I'd like to hear from Trey what your final thoughts are.
Well, I mean, for me, that all of what we are working on is, I think, continuing to monitor our own behavior and the behavior of a system in a way that is embodying these principles. And I think the tendency for all of us is to come in and do heavy design, and then it becomes extremely tough to redesign because we put all these resources and energy into it. And so there's this balance between a design that can be responsive and a design that becomes prescriptive. And I just long for the responsive design. It's not burdensome. It's not heavy. It's empowering of people in those roles, which means we'll need to be gracious with one another, but at the same time, we'll also recognize that there just has to be space for us to be able to make decisions that we go, okay, that really didn't serve us very well, and be able to be okay with that. And I think it's a deep, deep desire of mine. It's not tied to, business. It's just tied to life. And, but I see when people light up, I see when organizations begin to see the real potential that exists when this is not about what you see, it's about the whole. Thanks for asking, Samantha.
Thank you, Trey. Well, thank you all for, again, your community, your time. Thank you for being here. And again, as I mentioned, I think it's true for all of us at In Rhythm. We are really leaning into is helpful for us. It's part of our context. It's part of our healing and our work at this time to be of service. So please reach out in whatever way. Please join us again for these sessions. But if there's anything else in any way that we can help with our offerings, both as individuals and as a company, please let us know. So.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.